following podcast is for informational purposes only. The contents of this podcast do not constitute tax, legal, or investment advice. Take responsibility for your own decisions, consult with the proper professionals, and do your own research.
I feel like we're all, everybody that's a part of the network, delegators, indexers, anyone that is a member of the Graph protocol, developers as well, is a part of this journey. And I don't know exactly where we're heading, but I know that it's going to be exciting.
We're like astronauts floating in the space of time. Just between us and
Welcome to the GRTiQ podcast. Today I'm speaking with Dan Enright, an indexer at The Graph. Dan's indexer operation is called Blocksteady, and he joined me from his home in Australia. If you've listened to recent episodes of the podcast, then you know I'm interested in telling the stories of smaller indexers participating in The Graph. I'm doing this for a variety of reasons, but the primary intention is to shine a light on the stories and the people behind indexer operations that might sometimes get overlooked by delegators or the Graph community because they're smaller or because they're newer. As you will hear, Dan will share a familiar story, someone who changed careers, stepping into the entrepreneurial journey, and landing in the Graph protocol. Dan's background is interesting, beginning with a career in design and gaming, and then moving into the banking industry as a business analyst. And like many of you, Dan's entry into crypto and ultimately the Graph has the familiar themes of serendipity, hard work, and passion for working on something that can impact the world. As always, Dan and I started the discussion by talking about his professional and educational background.
Educationally, I graduated with a bachelor's degree in arts, funnily enough. I had attempted to do a technology and multimedia course when I first started university, but sort of swung towards the arts as I just ended up doing something that I was interested in rather than a vocational type of education. And then once I graduated, I actually entered the video game development industry as a game designer, which was pretty much my dream job at the time. I'd landed exactly where I wanted to be. I was a huge video game nerd and had a lot of fun working in that industry for around 5 years, and then made the move across to mainstream tech, I suppose, as a business analyst, and sort of found that my video game design skills translated well to documenting requirements and working with clients and customers in understanding what they want from a product, and then converting those requirements to specifications for developers to work with. I then moved into a project management role at a bank here in Australia, but then finished up that job last year when I took on indexing and working within crypto and Web3 full time.
Dan, I'd be interested to get your opinion on this idea that gaming's the next big thing in Web3 and crypto. Having the background that you do, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely room for gaming and metaverse experiences to leverage on what crypto and Web3 are bringing to us at this time. I think that there's so many avenues that gaming and metaverses can take with what crypto and Web3 enable. You see play-to-earn games out there where people are actually able to make a living from the rewards and understanding the intricacies of these play-to-earn games, as well as new social experiences being unlocked and allowing people to express themselves in metaverse environments using crypto assets as a way to dress themselves up or even create their own and share them with others.
Dan, you're joining me from Australia. You're the first GRTiQ podcast guest to join me from Australia. As you may or may not know, I always like to ask guests in different parts of the world what the opinions of the people where they live are towards crypto and blockchain and Web3. So what can you share about the people of Australia's attitudes or opinions towards crypto?
Yeah, I feel like that people are optimistic and willing to experiment and speculate upon crypto assets here in Australia. I see more and more things like advertising. You'll watch our local code of football, and you'll see various sponsors on the jerseys or on the billboards around the grounds and things like that. I think a lot of sports events here in Australia are forward thinking about crypto as well. We saw with the Australian Open earlier this year, there was an NFT associated with the event where people could purchase a tennis ball. And there's also a metaverse space set up in Decentraland where people could join in and share in the fandom of the event as well. A lot of my friends as well have purchased crypto assets as a speculative investment. And also, I see changes coming into the way by which the government and the discussions around the government are looking at crypto as well, in order to try and become clearer upon the regulatory needs as well as how they should be taxed as well. I feel like they think that this can be improved upon and think that it's an opportunity to foster innovation in Australia.
So Dan, like a lot of my guests, I follow you on Twitter and get a sense of what you're up to and the type of things you're interested in. One thing that I've noticed immediately, going back to what you just said there about NFTs, is you're somebody that has interest in NFTs and follows some different artists. What is it about that space that interests you?
There's so much that interests me and excites me about the NFT space. Just touching upon what you mentioned about artists, what I'm very excited about from the perspective of an artist is that they're now able to directly engage with their audience. With social media, it's a lot easier for people to discover artists that they may resonate with. I think the opportunity that artists have to directly engage not only socially, but financially with their audience via NFTs has liberated a lot of artists from how they may have originally worked with the traditional intermediaries in place.
Well, I want to go back in time with you, Dan, a little bit here. So you've talked about your background, studied art, went into gaming, worked for a bank, did business analytics, a lot of varied and diverse background. Can you take us back in time to when you first became aware of crypto and what your initial thoughts were?
Yeah, sure. So I first discovered crypto, specifically Ethereum. I'd heard of Bitcoin before that, but my first real experience with crypto was with Ethereum. I was working at an AML KYC provider at the time. So this was a software as a service company that I was working for, and they were looking at the blockchain as a way to retain a persistent identity for customers and allow that as a key to their identity on online platforms. This was in 2016. So I bought some Ethereum at the time, which would have been a great investment had I held on to it. I bought some to experiment with. So I was initially interested in the technology and then got a little bit worried about holding on to it because of how volatile it was. I sold that Ethereum, but then returned back later that year to the market, buying some Ethereum again after seeing it had run up substantially. And I thought, there is something going on here and I need to be involved. At that point, I became interested in crypto assets more from a speculative and investment angle and went about actually building an Ethereum mining machine. So I went out and bought 6 graphics processing units and pulled together a rig and started mining Ethereum and trying to see if I could earn kind of a passive income that way. It was a fun experiment for a while. The cost of electricity was somewhat prohibitive to me, making anything substantial from that. So I ended up selling that mining rig, but remained in the space. This was in late 2017 and early 2018. So that there was a huge amount of excitement in the market at this time. There was the ICOs that had all launched and, there was the odd diamond in the rough there, but a lot of those investments saw a lot of capital in the market vaporize. But yeah, I remained interested in the space and eventually discovered the graph in 2020.
Well, you're not the first guest who bought Ethereum and wish they would have held on to it early on, so you're in good company. But I do want to know what it was about Ethereum that was an aha moment for you? You mentioned you knew about Bitcoin. That wasn't sufficient to pull you into the space. So then what was it about Ethereum that piqued your interest?
Okay, so Ethereum specifically was interesting for me because, sure, I understood Bitcoin being a store of value, a currency that can be exchanged, but Ethereum was particularly interesting as it was a distributed ledger that could also be computed upon. So there could be smart contracts that were written and used as a means to trustlessly engage between clients, between companies, and between any third party, really, without the need to trust any intermediary between. So the applications of this really, I couldn't comprehend as how far this could go, but I knew that this was an important building block for how we would communicate and interoperate with each other in the future.
I'm intrigued by you, Dan, because you come from an art background, you've worked in a bank, you've done some analyst work, but you built an Ethereum mining rig and you understood the computational value that something like Ethereum could offer the world. Where do you get this capability or sense for technology?
I would have to put that down to, I've always been interested in computers. When I was young, my grandfather, one of the gifts that he gave to our family was a computer to have in the home. And I spent hours tinkering away on that, trying to draw graphics, trying to make, a mouse move through a cage or something like that, just experimenting with a computer from a young age. I suppose I was fascinated with what, an input that I could provide that produced an effect on the screen. But then this curiosity, I suppose, or this, desire to see what computation could achieve carried forward with me through the rest of my life. And when I saw what could be achieved on Ethereum or on smart contract platforms, particularly bringing finance into the picture as well, I was immediately engaged.
The GRTiQ podcast is made possible by a generous grant from the Graph Foundation. The Graph Grants program provides support for protocol infrastructure, tooling, dApps, subgraphs, and community building efforts. Learn more at thegraph.foundation. That's thegraph.foundation.
Hi, this is GRTiQ. As a Graph advocate and a member of the Graph Advocates DAO, I've had the opportunity to meet with members of the Graph community from all across the world. I'm in awe and I'm inspired about the people you can meet, the places you can discover, and the passion that you will find in the Graph community. On June 2nd, members of the Graph ecosystem will be meeting in San Francisco, California for Graph Day. Many of you will be there, and I'm excited to meet other Graph advocates who will be making the trip. Please visit the show notes for information on how to purchase a ticket, and don't forget, you can apply for a scholarship if you need some extra help in attending. I can't wait to see you there. Dan, you can't talk about some of the things you mentioned there without adding this concept of Web3. Web3's become an interesting concept that I discuss on the podcast with each guest, trying to get a sense of how they think about, how they define this important concept. So as somebody who's thought about these things, how do you think about and explain what Web3 is?
So Web3 to me is a term that I'm still kind of trying to define for myself, but I think something significant about it is that the consumer or the individual, when interacting with a Web3 platform, they're now further empowered by this sense of ownership that they've got when they do, purchase the asset or own their ENS domain name, or they've got their own profile picture that they're using to engage with others in that community or on that platform with. And not only are they able to participate in this way, but the platform is also decentralized rather than it being a centralized entity which relies on these people coming to their platform and using their data in order to sustain their existence.
A popular question I ask on the podcast, Dan, is Web3 an inevitability, or is it an experiment? Something like people like you or me are watching to see what happens?
I think I don't have the conviction yet to say that it's going to be inevitable, but it's definitely an experiment worth trying for.
I want to turn now our discussion towards the graph. You've mentioned it already that it was one of the projects you found after you became interested and found conviction for Ethereum. When's the first time you heard about the graph, and what were some of the initial thoughts you had?
I first heard about the graph in a Telegram discussion group that I was in. I actually first learnt about it via the mission control program that the word was spreading around about, and I was fascinated by it. I actually hadn't come across it before and didn't really have a lot of experience with Web3 at the time. So I didn't even, I'd played with some DeFi protocols before, but did not have an understanding of the underlying technology which actually enabled us to use dApps in the way that we do. So to learn that the graph was powering the queries that were being made by these decentralized apps, I was immediately interested in joining Mission Control.
And you joined Mission Control as an indexer, is that correct?
That's right.
So what was it about the role of indexer that you said, hey, of all the ways to get involved with the graph, indexer seems to be best suited for me?
I figured why not just jump straight into the deep end with the graph. I'd operated nodes in the past before. I'd always been experimenting or thinking about how I could find somewhere within the crypto sphere to earn an income alongside my full-time job. So upon hearing about indexing and what that actually did for decentralized applications and how it could potentially be pretty much a foundation of Web3, I thought, why not throw my hat into the ring and give indexing a go?
And so what's the name of your indexer?
The name of my indexer is Blocksteady.
Recently, I've been working to kind of shine a light on newer and smaller indexers working at the graph. I recently had Vince with Notify on, and now I get the opportunity to talk with you. And I'm interested in asking questions about the process behind making the decision to become an indexer, because as you said in your background, you left a job to go full-time into becoming an indexer at the graph. What can you share with us about all the thinking that goes into a decision like that? Do you build a marketing plan? Do you build a financing plan? Do you build a budget? All those types of things.
Yeah, sure. So the decision to have a go at indexing was one that naturally just followed from the mission control program. There was a reward given to participants of some stake that could be used on the network. And so I put that to work. I staked my GRT as an indexer. At this point, I did not even consider, leaving my full-time job to index full-time. I just wanted to see how this went. So I did that, and there was some delegation that came in initially, which was very encouraging. There was, I think, some other vesting contracts on the network wanted to put their GRT to work, and a lot of us indexers from the Mission Control program received this delegation. And after a few weeks of indexing, I then started to consider looking at the numbers. So I used a calculator to try and work out how much GRT was I receiving. What if I changed my reward cut parameters to this amount? How would that change what I'm receiving? What if I received further delegation? What if I lost delegation? I'd want to understand the different scenarios that could potentially eventuate. And I was fortunate enough actually to receive a large amount of delegation from a connection that I had in a messaging group here in Australia. And I was very grateful to receive that from a fund here in Australia. They had a lot of GRT that they could distribute, and they used this amongst a couple of indexers on the network, myself being one of them. So I had a good relationship with them. They could see my track record. And after receiving this delegation, after a couple of months of earning rewards, I had enough runway to make the leap into indexing full time. So I was fortunate. I didn't really need to go out and market myself too much. I do now find myself in a position, though, where that delegation has left my indexer, and I've actually assisted that fund in setting up their own indexer. I will look now to see how I can market myself further, but I'm still in a position where I'm receiving enough rewards from the delegation that I have currently to maintain my operation as a full-time venture.
Take us into the mindset of a newer, smaller indexer and how they think about delegators. And how important do you think those participants, those indexers at the graph, view delegation and the activities of delegators?
As a smaller indexer on the network, I see delegates as essential to our existence on the network. Without receiving delegation from GRT owners, we wouldn't survive with an amount of self-stake that we have. And in order to attract that stake, we need to be not only competitive, I suppose, with our reward rates, but also we need to be, I would put it as more agile with the way that we manage our operations on the network. So looking for ways in which we can allocate our stake in order to generate the most rewards for our delegates.
Dan, I'd like to know about that important decision you made. In preparation for this interview, I learned that you're a husband, you've got children, you're a family man, and here you are making a career change, basically becoming an entrepreneur, so to speak, and going full-time as an indexer. What can you tell us about that decision and deciding to do something like that?
Yeah, it wasn't a decision that I took lightly, that's for sure. There was a point at which I was looking at the performance of my indexing income and knew that if I actually dedicated myself full time to this, I would have a better chance of making this work than balancing it with a 9 to 5 job. And after some coercion of my wife and trying to translate exactly what was happening here, which was difficult to do at the time, crypto assets being volatile in nature, I decided that it was worth having a go at. I had enough runway to give this a go, and if it didn't work, I could return back to working full time. But I thought, this is going to have a better chance of working if I did dedicate myself full time to it.
These conversations I'm having with newer, up and coming indexers are really a story about entrepreneurs and about people who find themselves in an inflection point in their career or what they want to do with their lives. And you and a few others decided to become an indexer at the graph. Do you see yourself as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, of course. I never saw myself as an entrepreneur before or having an entrepreneurial nature. But now that I'm in it, I could not see it otherwise. I think that I am. So yes, I have had to set up a business in order to operate this venture. I've set myself up with the right frameworks, the right legal structures in place to do so. So yes, I do now see myself as an entrepreneur, but I didn't see myself in this way prior to taking this on. Hi, this is Dan Enright with Blocksteady. If my conversation with the GRTiQ podcast has been helpful to you, then please consider supporting future episodes by becoming a subscriber. Visit grtiq.com/podcast for more information. That's grtiq.com/podcast.
GRTiQ podcast.
Thanks for listening.
Roger that.
So here's the question I think that a lot of listeners are going to want to know the answer to. And I say this because I know there are listeners of this podcast who want to one day be an indexer. And they won't really have the benefit that you've had of participating in mission control and some of the education, I'm sure, that came along with that. So if you could speak to those who have the ambition of doing what you're doing now, going full-time as an indexer, making a career change, becoming an entrepreneur, what would be your advice to them?
Firstly, I'd say embarking on becoming an indexer is an investment in the graph ecosystem. So this can be a journey that can be started gradually. You can start by buying some GRT. you can start by delegating that GRT. And that way you get an understanding of the ecosystem, how indexing works, what the role of a delegate is within the network. All the different roles within the graph ecosystem are interconnected. So having that understanding of delegating and then moving on to an indexer is a good way to get started. When looking at becoming an indexer, there's a lot of helpful people within the graph community that you'll find if you join the Discord or you have a look at the forum. So that is a great first place to start when looking to become an indexer. There's also a testnet available for indexing upon, so you actually can understand what's involved in operating an indexer. You'll need to make decisions about whether you rent the server that you're going to run the indexer on, whether you're going to purchase the hardware, and there's people that are available to help answer these questions for you as well. One thing that I've found about indexing on the graph is that the community is very, very supportive. I've found other indexers in the mission control program, as well as those that have joined afterwards, to be extremely helpful within the graph Discord.
Dan, what do you wish the broader graph community understood about smaller and up-and-coming indexers like Blocksteady?
I wish that there was a recognition about how important all indexers are to the graph community, not just for them, but also the network as a whole. Without a wide variety, without numerous indexers on the graph network, we're going to see stake pour into the same top 5, top 10 indexers on the network, which actually brings about a problem of centralizing stake. So I think that it would be great if more people were aware of not just how important stake is to those smaller indexes to remain present on the network, but the importance of having these smaller indexes on the network is for the graph as a whole.
What I hear you saying there, Dan, is that this issue of keeping stake decentralized is not only about making sure that we don't commit the sins of Web 2 and create centralization in a decentralized protocol, but you're also saying at some functional level, the protocol just doesn't do what it's supposed to do if we fall into that trap. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I think we're going to come across a time in the near future where there are that many new subgraphs being deployed that the same indexes that I can count on one hand, say we do arrive in that scenario, won't keep up with indexing or making available the subgraphs that these dApps need to query. There's opportunity for the smaller indexes when they do see new subgraphs come online to add them to their indexer and make data available where it's needed. And I think it's important for these smaller indexes to be able to stay around on the network in order to do so.
This is a tough question, Dan. I've asked it before, but I want to ask it to you as well. What do you say to delegators who say, look, I'm all in favor of decentralization and keeping stake decentralized. I really want to support and help smaller up-and-coming indexers, but there's some risk component here, and I'm just not sure I can delegate my GRT with a smaller, newer indexer versus one of the more established, well-known ones. What do you say to them?
I say that's a totally reasonable frame of mind to take towards delegating your GRT on the network. I think as a delegate, when looking at where to stake your GRT on the network, it's important to not put all your eggs in one basket, not choose a single indexer to stake that upon, but you can also help assist with decentralizing stake on the network by choosing a variety of indexes to delegate your GRT with. In order to select which indexes to delegate towards, I'd recommend having a look at the track record of those indexes, having a look to see whether they have reliably been distributing rewards from closing their allocations, having a look to see whether you can reach them on social channels. It's always good to be able to communicate with those indexes directly to see what their plans are or how they're managing their operations. You can reduce the amount of risk that you're taking on by ticking a few of these checkboxes when choosing which indexer to delegate with.
Dan, I'm sure your answer will be a little biased because you are part of the machinery that makes the graph protocol work. But outside of that, how do you think about the role the graph plays for Web3?
I think the graph is crucially important to the progression of Web3. I think the infrastructure that they provide for newcomers to the space is actually so enabling and so empowering for those wanting to contribute and build within the Web3 space. Imagine if every new Web3 developer that came and started building their application needed to build a framework upon which they could rapidly query the data that they need to in order to make what they're building available. So the graph has built an off-the-shelf solution that allows Web3 developers to come in and hit the ground running with building what it is that they're dreaming of.
Another theme that keeps coming up on the podcast is this strange dichotomy with indexers, because in a sense, indexers are competitors. We've already mentioned that you're a businessman, you're an entrepreneur. And so in some sense, you're competing with other indexers. But what's interesting is how the indexer community works together. And despite some of the competition, it's friendly, it's helpful, and people are reaching out to one another. Is that a fair characterization of that indexer community at the Graph?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been very pleasantly surprised with just how supportive the community is in helping fellow indexers resolve issues or improve upon their operations, not only during the mission control stages, but for newcomers coming to the network now. There is plenty of hands going up in order to support those that have questions about how they can get set up as an indexer or how to resolve issues that they've got. Yes, it's a competitive environment. You know, every indexer is trying to attract delegation, but everybody knows that we're all in this together as well at the end of the day, and that we would like to see the network just thrive and expand with more participants.
The Graph recently released, Dan, its R&D roadmap. There was a lot of information there about the Graph ecosystem and some of the different things that the core dev teams are focusing their attention on. When you look at this stuff specific to indexers or even your own thoughts, what are some of the big things you think, big mileposts coming for the work of indexers and how they can contribute in building the protocol?
I was excited to see that there was a lot of planned improvements for the indexer experience within the recently received R&D roadmap. It's great to see that the Graph is recognizing some of the needs of the indexer community with what they've outlined.
So Dan, what most excites you then about the future of the Graph?
So I feel like the Graph, being a participant on the Graph network, is being part of one journey with a lot of others. And what's really exciting about it for me is that it feels like, although we've been on mainnet for some time, that it's a journey that's just beginning. I like to think of the analogy of, a plane being in mid-flight, which is being, constantly built or improved upon. And I feel like we're all, everybody that's a part of the network, delegators, indexers, anyone that is a member of the Graph protocol, developers as well, is a part of this journey. And I don't know exactly where we're heading, but I know that it's going to be exciting.
Well, Dan, now it's time for the GRTiQ 10. These are 10 questions I'm asking every guest of the podcast each week to help listeners learn something new, try something different, or achieve more. So, Dan, are you ready for the GRTiQ 10?
Yeah, let's go for it.
The GRTiQ 10.
10 questions for astronauts floating in space.
What book or article has had the most impact on your life?
I'd say recently I read Ready Player One and thoroughly enjoyed it. And it's sort of given me a new perspective on Web3 and the metaverse.
Is there a movie or TV show that you think every human should be required to watch?
I am going to recommend Ted Lasso. I think a lot of people may have overlooked this series, but I just think there's so much that can be taken from it, and it's a lot of fun.
Dan, what's the best advice someone's ever given you?
I saw someone recently purchase an NFT, and their username was Never Too Late. I feel like that resonated with me well because I felt like I arrived late to the NFT market, but have found that I wasn't, in fact, and I don't think it ever is too late.
If you could listen to only one music album for the rest of your life, which one do you choose?
I think that I would go with Daft Punk Discovery.
What's one thing you've learned in your life that you don't think most people know?
Recently, I took the time to learn how to develop assets for and deploy an NFT collection.
What's the best life hack you've discovered for yourself?
When you're questioning whether you should go to bed that 1 hour earlier than you usually would. You'll thank yourself for it the next day.
Based on your own experiences and observations, what's the one habit or characteristic that you think best explains people finding success in life?
I'd say it's a combination of curiosity and perseverance. I think having that persistence to push on and try and do something where you could easily have turned back upon something that you're curious about can bring you things that you never thought you could have achieved.
And Dan, the final 3 questions are complete the sentence. Complete this sentence. The thing that most excites me about Web3 is?
The inclusiveness and empowerment that comes along with it.
How about this one? If you're on Twitter, then you should be following
a Twitter account called Stop Scrollin'. It's basically an account that tweets every now and then to say, shut off your Twitter feed.
And lastly, complete the sentence. I'm happiest when
I'm spending time with my loved ones.
The GRTiQ 10.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole.
Dan Enright with Blocksteady, I really appreciate your time. You've been very generous in answering these questions. And if people want to learn more about you, the work you're doing at Blocksteady, what's the best way to do it?
They can visit my website at blocksteady.xyz. I can also be found within the Graph Discord as Dan Blocksteady. You can also follow or message me on Twitter as well. My Twitter handle is DanCube with a 3 instead of the B at the end.
This has been a production of the GRTiQ podcast. For more information, including detailed show notes, visit grtiq.com/podcast. That's grtiq.com/podcast.
Please consider contributing to this project and helping build the community by subscribing and leaving a review. GRTiQ Podcast.